Hello and welcome to RADTV, live at 5:25 in Chittenden County, Channel 17, Centre for Media and Democracy and Town Meeting Television. For those that haven't seen our show before, RAD stands for Rights and Democracy. It's a grassroots, people-powered organisation creating an independent political movement for a long-lasting fundamental change in Vermont and New Hampshire. This is a call-in show, so if you're so inclined, please give us a ring. Our number is 802-862-3966. And if you like what you see tonight, please consider donating to RAD. You can find us at radvt.org and radnh.org. And of course, you can always watch our show. We're on the fourth Friday of every month. I'm your host for this evening, Tom Proctor. And this month on RADTV, we'll be exploring a new social contract for workers. We'll be reviewing this report from the National Economic and Social Rights Institute, NESRI, and discussing what's next for Vermont's labour movement and explore how we can implement a new social contract for workers here in our state. With me this evening, we have calling in on Skype, Kathy Albisa, co-founder and executive director of NESRI, NESRI. Hello, Kathy.
Hi, how are you? And I just want to add the report is actually co-produced by RAD, Jobs with Justice, People's Action. So it was really a collective effort.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kathy. And we also have David Van Giessen, newly elected president of the Vermont State Labour Council, Afl-Cio. Good evening.
Pleasure to be here today, Tom.
Thank you very much for joining as well. And Kathy, we'll start with you. Would you like to give yourself a brief 30-second spiel of who you are and a little bit about your background?
Sure. NESRI stands for the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative, and basically we just believe everyone has economic and social rights, right? That everyone should have health care and housing and education and decent work. And we work with groups like RAD across the country to move that agenda from a community-based perspective. We believe in community-led solutions and movement solutions, which is what this report is about.
Wonderful. And David, if you give us a little bit of background on the Vermont State Labour Council and a little bit of background about yourself.
Happy to. We represent 10,000 workers in Vermont from just about every sector, from nurses to town plow drivers to everything in between, folks that work in the schools, you name it, writers. So what we recently had an election in the Afl-Cio, and we elected a new leadership to our state executive board. I'm honored to be part of that, which is a progressive, which wants to bring a new progressive outlook onto our labor politics and to rethink some of the both priorities, but also the means that we achieve those priorities that we articulate. So we're re-looking at that, and part of that is to work with organizations such as RAD and our allies from the different social movements across Vermont.
I'm glad to have you both on the show tonight. And I'd like to start a question with you, Kathy. As co-founder and executive director of NESRI, could you give us an overview about the new social contract and the impetus behind creating this important document?
Well, the project overall is asking a very simple question, which is what would our country look like if all sort of policies and practice actually reflected our values? You know, the values, progressive values, social movement values, social justice values. Part of that has to really focus on the reality that workers face every day. So as part of the project, we produced with a number of movement partners this new social contract for workers. And the fundamental concepts in the report are that everyone deserves a decent job. It's non-negotiable. No one should be placed in a position where they don't have access to a decent job. And everyone deserves a certain amount of power and democracy as a worker to have some control over the terms and conditions of their labor. So those are sort of the twin values, which if you think about it, it's rights and democracy. And we lifted up what are some of the most significant transformational ideas that unions and worker centers and their networks have all been pushing. Everything from guaranteeing a decent job through a federal jobs guarantee to sectoral bargaining, which is negotiating with an entire corporate sector because they divide us and they make it really difficult to negotiate at scale with the power that workers need, to creating more worker co-ops so workers can be owners too, to ensuring that workers have things like health care and child care and family care independent of their employers so that they're not beholden to whatever employer plans there are. They have universal public programs. So that's sort of generally where the report lies, and it also lifts up the notion of a just cause standard for jobs. No one should be fired without an explanation, without a reason, and without some notice. So those are the big five bold ideas, and we believe that our movements have been asking for that, and it would change the lives of people in an everyday way.
I want to do a quick follow-up on that one because this is called the new social contract. So historically, what was the social contract and how does this differ to what it was previously?
So a social contract is a metaphor, right, for the assumptions that we all hold about how our society should function. The 20th century social contract was a bit of a compromise, really between labor and capital after the Great Depression, and then that compromise was sort of further renegotiated through the great civil rights movements, right, of the mid-20th century. And that social contract previously basically assumed that if you are working, you're supposed to be able to meet your basic needs, but it doesn't guarantee a job. And you're supposed to be able to negotiate with your individual employer, but it doesn't guarantee a sort of larger negotiation of power between workers as a whole and capital as a whole. So the difference between what we see as the previous social contract that was responding to conditions at their time and this one is that capital has further globalized, further concentrated, and workers need to be able to respond at that scale. And there was also this piece where employers to be the one healthcare and our basic sort of benefits. But there's a lot of problems with that. It makes workers highly dependent on an employer. They can't move from job to job easily. And it also means we have to accept what employers provide in a very limited way, right? And everyone doesn't have the same access to healthcare or the same access to childcare. So, yeah, it's a set of assumptions, and given the changes in the economy, the changes in the world, and the moment we're in, we need to question those assumptions at this time.
David, as a newly elected president of the Vermont State Labour Council, what is your new vision for Vermont's labour movement, especially now you've managed to get a more progressive set of board members put into those seats?
Well, we absolutely support building out our social programs. Reading the report that your organization's produced, I was impressed, frankly. And the scope and the vision that's articulated in that report, which I encourage all your viewers to give a read to. I hope you provide a link at some point. That's the kind of society, as a starting point, that we need to be building. We support building out robustly our social programs. Let's take single payer, for example, be that done at the state level here in Vermont or be that done even better on a national level. We would love nothing more than to take healthcare out of the bargaining process so we could talk about other issues that are important to us and put that as a right, a guaranteed right for all working people. When you're sick, you shouldn't have to be concerned of whether or not you're going to have the ability to make yourself well. And it's just absolutely absurd that in a first world country that this doesn't exist yet. So our new slate, our new leadership, the AFL, will aggressively fight to build out our social programs, to continue the work of the New Deal, which has been on hold for a good 50 years. And we look forward to that struggle. And that's not going to be easy, of course. That's going to take mobilizing our members. That's going to be taking a lot of heavy lifting on our part and our members' part. But we feel optimistic that the tide is turning in the direction of working people in this country.
And as the president of the Vermont State Labour Council, what do you define as working people? Because traditionally that's always been seen as those that do manual labour. And in the 21st century, does that still fit the bill for workers' people, or is this now changed?
Look, if you rely on a paycheck for a living, and if you're a couple paychecks shy away from an economic disaster, I don't care if your fingernails are clean or dirty, you're a working class person. Now the term various terms like middle class and white collar, frankly, they've been invented, almost an extension of other divisions we've seen within the working class, to say, hey, you're different than the other. You don't have to be worried about the same things they're worried about because you're better than. But no, we're all in the same boat. And the way we win is for blue and white collar workers to stand together and not be divided, be it by those distinctions or by race or gender or any of those other false distinctions that have been made throughout the years.
Glad
to hear that. Yes, Kathy, you...
That is something that the previous social contract, while there was progress made, right? It is something it built in divisions. It built in divisions between white collar and blue collar. It built in divisions on race and gender. It built in divisions that kept workers with less power than they should have, which is why we're arguing, and many of our movements and the union movement is arguing, that the new social contract should be universal. It should overcome those divisions so that we can negotiate with capital in a way that creates a fair deal.
That leads me to my next question, Kathy, because in the report itself, it doesn't look through with rosy-colored glasses the previous social movements. For example, the New Deal and the New Deal Part 2. It looks at it from a very honest angle, but it really could still be seen, and is still seen as the golden age for workers' rights. So could you tell me a little bit about that, some of the more negative aspects of what the New Deal offered, but also what inspirations are we taking from that and putting it into this new social contract?
Yeah, I think it's important to see it in the complicated way in which it actually played out, right? Because if it had been a sustainable deal, we wouldn't be where we are. The divisions were seated in the way that deal was constructed. At the same time, it is impossible not to recognize that it was a step forward. It was just not enough step forward. So what do we mean by that? In that New Deal, workers were not all treated in the same way, right? Some workers were excluded. Most of them were black and brown, around farm work and domestic work. The way gendered work was not treated in the same way that let's say, manufacturing and other work was treated. And that ended up serving not the workers that were supposedly privileged, but capital, right? It ended up dividing workers. Additionally, we never made a commitment as a country to a guarantee of a decent job. We basically still said, you workers all have to compete against each other to survive. And however many jobs there are, we're going to play a game of musical chairs and the best workers get them. But every single family in this country needs to make a decent living. So the other shift we need to make is we need to recognize that it is a public responsibility to generate enough decent jobs for every family in this country to sustain itself. Right now, we consider 4% unemployment full employment, but that actually leaves millions of people seeking work. And at the same time, we tell people, if you're not working, you don't deserve anything. So these are the assumptions we need to shift. We need to get people off the hamster wheel, out of the musical chairs, and into a society that we're all contributing and producing and sharing those benefits equitably.
I would, if you don't mind, I would also add that even by the parameters of FDR's New Deal itself, the New Deal was incomplete. There was another phase of the New Deal which FDR was hoping to implement with the conclusion of the war that would have guaranteed work, that would have guaranteed health care, that would have guaranteed many of these things that we're talking about today. So even within that context, that work was incomplete. But now, with the talk of the Green New Deal, perhaps this is an opportunity today to start looking at how we could learn from the successes and failures of the old deal, the old New Deal, right, and improve upon those and complete some of those tasks which were not done, were not completed because of the untimely death of Franklin Roosevelt.
And that actually leads me to my next question to you is, it's mentioned in the new social contract, we as workers actually have that social responsibility as well, or we should be imbued with that social responsibility. That social responsibility shouldn't be relied upon by those at the top because, frankly, they've been lacking. how much does the Vermont Labour Council support that vision? And if you do, how do you implement this?
Clarify a little bit what you mean here. Not relying on those at the top. You're talking about the democratization of society or work?
Correct. And with that, the social responsibility that we as workers should have. So, for example, using too much, wasting too many materials, and using or dumping.
Look, in the world that I deal with, workplaces are run better, more efficiently, safer when individuals who are a member of the union have a say in those conditions, be it through labor management meetings, be it through safety committee meetings, be it through seats that are bargained on hiring committees, et cetera. So the more democracy you could build into work sites, the better, more responsible, in my opinion, things will be. When I was an AOT rep some years ago for Agency of Transportation, one of the wastes that we saw, that our members saw in the 60 garages scattered throughout the state, is sometimes perfectly good hardwood would be cut down and thrown over banks, just thrown over, right? Banks to rot on the side of the road. Our members we went to management, we said, we're struggling to find heating fuel for poor people's houses, and we're throwing cord after cord after cord of good wood right over the bank. So the union members there, we went and we pressured the state, and they agreed to come to an arrangement with low-income groups that help with such things, and to provide that wood as needed for low-income folks. So right there is a perfect example where working people, in solidarity with those who also struggle, can find a way to do things better that is less wasteful. So we need to build democracy in our shops, in our workplace, and in society as a whole. And even if we win great things, be it through, we've seen through the New Deal or through the Great Society, we now see over the last 50 years that without a real democracy in place, those things could be taken away by those people who have a near monopoly on political power in our society.
You mentioned the Green New Deal and what that might be able to usher in just a moment ago. What's Vermont's place in the Green New Deal, and how do we make sure that this time the power rests with the workers and not, as the New Deal ended up, resting still more with those that own the capital?
Well, the Afl-Cio today, the leadership, we support a Green New Deal long as it is union-based and guarantees prevailing wages and guarantees, to all extents possible, that it's going to be good family-sustaining jobs that are creating for this, not a lowest common denominator kind of situation. Our two big wind farms that were built in the last decade up in the Northeast Kingdom, Lowell and Sheffield, there was a grand total of 4 union jobs, happened to be iron worker jobs, with all the people that built those. Those were built largely by folks who were getting paid poverty wages, who were staying in motels, who were shipped in from out of state with no benefits. So that's the kind of thing we can't have. What we need to have is not just sustainable ecology, sustainable energy production, but we need sustainable jobs to be part and parcel of that process. So that is absolutely key to developing a Green New Deal going forward. And we could lead the way in Vermont. There is a will here. The question is, do we have the political muscle to see it through? As far as the democracy that has to overlie all of that, I think that's a broader discussion, but there are certainly things we could do as Vermonters, we must do, in my opinion, to build greater degrees of direct participatory democracy into our own communities. But that might be a discussion for another moment.
Fair enough.
Well, but it's actually very relevant to this discussion, because part of the shift we need to make is to understand the difference between negotiation and democracy, right?
Agreed.
We need to have negotiation, but we want to negotiate towards democracy, right? We want workers to be active, deep, genuine democratic stakeholders in their workplaces.
Absolutely.
Not cogs, machines that are disposable. And that is the same concept that needs to be built into the Green New Deal. No Green New Deal can be successful and sustainable if it's not people-centered. And if it's not people-centered, if it's not worker-centered, it's not people-centered.
I'm with you all the way.
Build it out around workers.
I couldn't agree with you more. I would also add to that what we need to do is also look at the broader structures of our society and find places where we can make them more democratic. And so one of the things that the new leadership, the AFL, supports is to changing our method of government to allow for a town meeting-based referendum system in Vermont to allow people, and not the 180 lawmakers in Montpelier who are bombarded by highly paid lobbyists every day, but allow actual people to make decisions such as about the livable wage, such as about the paid family medical leave. And one of the things I loved in the report that we're talking about today was the focus on building resources and building out worker cooperatives, which of course is a very democratic means and an economically sustainable model, in my opinion, for how we could build that democracy in a real way for working people in the shops where they actually work. But there has to be real resources put to that. That can't be a symbolic, we'll put a little bit of money and have a committee that looks at it. That has to be approached in a serious manner. But that is something that has huge, profound potential to transform our economy and our democracy.
And Kathy, how do organizations like RAD fit in with this vision of the future of a collective process, and how instrumental was RAD and other organizations in creating this report?
I would very comfortably say this report would not exist without RAD. RAD is a visionary organization. You're a part of it, so you know that. And it actually provides a national leadership role despite being grounded in 2 states. RAD was actually the catalyst that brought all these national groups together and said, hey, we're a working class organization. We want you to go deeper on issues of workers and a new social contract, because that is what matters to our constituency. So I think that there is no national without local, right? There is no national without state-based. And really the national leadership that we're going to see to create something that's different in terms of a new social contract will come out of organizations like RAD, leaders that come out of a place like RAD, and the relationship that RAD has with and other sort of stakeholders that are all looking for this opportunity when we're in such a polarized political moment to actually find something good at the other end of this very difficult political landscape that we're all experiencing.
And David, you were mentioning organisation within the workforce is kind of critical in order for us to actually change how these workforces are managed and give power back to the workers. How do you propose to galvanise those in Vermont that haven't heard of the Labour Council or don't realise the power they can gain through unionising?
Well, first of all, we have to put our money where our mouth is. What's good for the goose, good for the gander. So we are going to, first and foremost, democratize the Afl-Cio. Our last election was done through a delegate system, which is not so different than the Electoral College. And we don't believe that's a way to get people involved and interested in their own organization. So what we are going to do is change that to give rank and file members direct votes and direct say and a real voice on not only in elections, but also in the policies we adopt as the state Afl-Cio. And when we do that, and we do that right, and when we are channeling and actually expressing the desires and dreams of the members we represent, then and only then will the rank and file be motivated, and that is where our power is.
Okay. Kathy, the new social contract concludes that it is community and movement-driven solutions that are grounded in values that help construct the path. So how does RAD lead the way to aid this construction in Vermont? And what can other organizations like RAD do to promote this new social contract?
Well, as you probably noticed from the report, there are 2 parts, right? There is the vision that we are all building together, that we need to be contributing to, calling for, creating larger pressure on. And I know RAD is about to have a presidential forum. I know RAD does both, sort of has a C3 arm and a C4 arm. And part of what RAD does is build vision and build leaders that support and promote the vision. But the other thing that RAD does is actually move existing policy change on the ground. So the second part of the report is like, these are the things we can do now. These are the things we can do to start building momentum towards these bigger themes, right? So every time your members go to the State House, every time your members do a really creative a strong, powerful demo. Every time your leaders are able to share their analysis on the nature of the problem and the solution, you are actually building towards this new social contract, because it will not come from 2 or 3 voices. It'll come from the multitude of voices working together towards change, right? We know we're up against a level of concentrated capital and power we have not seen, frankly, since before the last social contract. And it will take, just as it did then, a strong movement across many states. And I am profoundly impressed with the role that RAD is playing in that context.
Well, that's all about we've got time for tonight. I would like to thank you, David and Kathy, for joining me this evening. And I will urge everyone to read A New Social Contract. I will be providing a link on our website of that. Thank you, David, for reminding me. A little word about our sustaining members before I go. Please help us to grow and win. As Kathy's mentioned, RAD do some fantastic work and promote the rights of all people in Vermont and New Hampshire. And we need help doing that. So if you can head over to radvt.org or radnh.org, you can donate and become a sustaining member today. We will see you again next month, right back here on Channel 17 on October the 4th Friday of October at 5:25. This has been RADTV. I've been your host, Tom Proctor. Thank you so much to my guests this evening.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Virtual handshake to you, Kathy. Good night, and thank you for watching.
Bye.